All right. Liz Sargent is a historical landscape architect and principal of Liz Sargent HLA, a historic preservation firm based in Charlottesville. Liz is a former board member of the Ivy Creek Foundation and leads the Farmhouse Study Group, and took the lead also on preparing the National Register of Historic Places nomination for Riverview Farm. The group included many dedicated supporters who conducted extensive research into the history of Riverview Farm and the Carr-Greer Farmhouse in order to guide appropriate preservation and interpretation strategies for the future. Liz continues to contribute to this process by sharing her expertise working on similar projects throughout the country. Liz, take it away.
Thank you, Sue. We will also be hearing from Jody Lahendro later, and I'll introduce him briefly before his section of the talk. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have you here today, and we're so glad to present and celebrate the current recognition of the importance of Riverview Farm and the Carr-Greer family through the National Register of Historic Places listing in December 2020, and to share the ongoing work of Ivy Creek Foundation, along with many other groups and individuals who are working to preserve this public treasure and to make the stories of life at Riverview Farm available to the broadest possible audience. Uh-oh. It won't advance, hold on. There we go. In our discussions today, we will share the way in which a community of dedicated individuals is giving generously of their time and energy to furthering the Foundation's mission of connecting people to the past and present by honoring the land, history, and community that has lived here. We also explore the ways in which the current efforts to preserve and protect the Riverview Farm property dovetail with and support the Ivy Creek Foundation's recently completed strategic plan. Sue Earhart will present that information at the end of this part of the talk. Since the founding of the organization in 1979, Ivy Creek Foundation has been involved in the stewardship and interpretation of Riverview Farm history, along with all of the natural resource history that you're that you may be familiar with. Today, these efforts are led by Education Director Catherine Boston and supported by the Foundation's Education Committee, a group of volunteers that regularly conducts research into the history of the property and supports the needs of docents who provide tours and programs about the property to the public, especially and including school groups when not amidst a pandemic. Throughout much of this time, since 1979, the historic Carr-Greer Farmhouse was occupied by a caretaker hired by Albemarle County, who is the co-owner of the property with the city of Charlottesville, in order to protect the building against deterioration and vandalism, and also to be an eyes-on person on the property to protect it as well. For many years, because of the caretakers living in the house, visitors to Ivy Creek were unable to access the house and visit the outbuildings around it to learn about that aspect of the property, as they were closed to the public. Much of the interpretation of the Carr-Greer family history has centered around the barn built by Conley Greer, which features prominently in the Ivy Creek Foundation logo. In 2017, the Albemarle County Parks and Recreation Division, which oversees the property, made a game-changing proposal to work with Ivy Creek Foundation to determine the future of the Carr-Greer Farmhouse. They had determined that they did not necessarily need to continue having a caretaker in the house, and they offered the foundation the opportunity to consider options for the future of the building and the associated outbuildings, which led us to create an ad hoc committee, the Farmhouse Study Group, to consider options for the future. The Farmhouse Group was born in November 2017. This is some of us meeting together on the property. The first leader of the group was Steve Thompson, shown in the far right of the photograph. Today, we will briefly trace the history of Riverview Farm and the contributions of the Carr-Greer family efforts to recognize the significance of the history through listing in the National Register of Historic Places, and the stewardship efforts conducted to date, along with a vision and plan for the future. Several members of the Farmhouse Group are present today and should be available for questions later. We also welcome, as Sue mentioned, several family members and descendants of the Carr-Greer family at this meeting today, as well as Dr. Virgil Wood, who was a student of Mary Carr-Greer. The importance of all of these individuals and their support and knowledge of the early preservation efforts of the property are linked with us for the past and leading to the future. We also recognize the early preservation efforts of Babs Conant, the early foundation board, and others who, if they had not been, had the foresight to preserve and protect evidence of the stories as well as the features on the ground, we would not be here today. This became clear and apparent to me this week as I helped my mother clear out her house of 56 years and sifting through the accumulated possessions of her life, my life, and the memories that have been passed down to her by her mother and her grandmother. Choices about what to save and what to let go had to be made over and over again. Members of the Carr-Greer family left an incredible record of materials in a trunk that was found after Babs Conant helped acquire the property. And those records were preserved and placed in the University of Virginia Special Collections Library and remain available today for all of us to use to sort of trace the history. Those papers could have easily been lost, and those incredible records of the family history of Hugh Carr's purchase of land, of his marriage certificate, of purchases that they made for the house, could easily have been lost. And so the fine details of the history could have been lost. Those treasured materials form the basis for storytelling today. We also have benefited greatly from the years that Dee Dee Smith served as executive director and continued a research process over many years, and also a connection with family and descendants to collect oral histories, to support family reunions, and to overall try to organize and collect information. And so this becomes the basis for our record today. The information that was available to us as the Farmhouse Group worked to develop ideas for what to do with the property. One of the places where the information that was collected played an important role was in the preparation of the National Register nomination for Riverview Farm. As the Farmhouse Group began working with Albemarle County on ideas for how the Carr-Greer Farmhouse might be used in the future, everyone in the group felt strongly that it was important that the house should be made open to the public, with a goal of preserving and protecting the historic characteristics of the house and other aspects of the farm, such as those shown here, the cemetery, the outbuildings, some of the old road traces and the field patterns. We started to learn that National Register listing would help in a couple of important ways. It would allow us to waive certain building codes if we wanted to open the building to the public, which would help us to protect some of the historic fabric. It would also help us to tell the stories in the future. And it would also, once listed, the property would be more likely eligible for grant funding for some of the projects that we envisioned in terms of interpreting the property. It also became clear and apparent through some of the work being done by the National Trust for Historic Preservation and others that properties of African-American heritage are woefully underrepresented in the National Register of Historic Places. I believe only about 5% of the properties that are currently listed are those related to African American history. And through developing a National Register nomination, we would have the opportunity to further the need to bring greater diversity to this important record of American history. The National Register nomination for Riverview Farm that was prepared by Steve Thompson, myself, and other members of the Farmhouse group is available online. The property was listed in the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places in late 2020. The nomination describes all the historic features of Riverview Farm that we recognize today as surviving today with a direct connection to Hugh Carr, Mary Carr-Greer, and Conley Greer. The nomination also contains an overview history of the property from early settlement to the present, which is a great record for anyone who wants to learn more about the history of the property, and also articulates why the contributions of family members are recognized as significant in American history. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and significance of the property. And in so doing, I'm going to use some of the images that some of you may have seen in Eric Ertenhoff's presentation in the February Ivy talk, where he explored the history using map and photograph analysis, which is wonderful, and a lot of which is available online. So I've borrowed some of Eric's slides today, and these also represent another piece of the important body of knowledge that we've collected about the property. So Riverview Farm, shown here as it was established by Hugh Carr in 1870. By Hugh Carr, who was born an enslaved person who was able to put a down payment on a 58-acre parcel of land near the confluence of Ivy Creek and the Rivanna River in 1870. Carr used money saved from working as a laborer and later a farm manager at nearby local properties for the down payment. In 1873, Carr completed the payment on the land, owning it free and clear. He continued to purchase adjacent contiguous parcels through the rest of the 19th century. By the time of his death in 1914, Carr had amassed a farm totaling 108 acres and was among the largest African-American landowners in Albemarle County. Carr was part of a community of African-American farmers, tradespeople, businessmen, ministers, and educators centered around Union Ridge and hydraulic mills that prospered during the fourth quarter of the 19th century. Although the exact date of construction is not known, about 1880, Carr built a frame Virginia I house on the farm. This is the house that survives on the property today that's the focus of much of this talk. Hugh Carr and his wife, Texie Mae Hawkins, raised 7 children in the house, 6 daughters and 1 son. As noted by his children and others, although he had never learned to read or write, Hugh and Texie Mae Carr encouraged all of their children to gain as much education as possible. Several of the daughters went on to college and graduate school, and 2 became local notable educators, Mary Carr-Greer and Peachy Carr-Jackson. Following Hugh Carr's death in 1914, his eldest daughter, Mary Carr-Greer, and her husband, Conley Greer, inherited 18 acres of the farm and the circa 1880 farmhouse, which the Carrs expanded in 1915. Over time, in addition to acquiring most of the remainder of Hugh Carr's Riverview Farm from Mary Carr-Greer's siblings, they further expanded the property to more than 200 acres. While managing the farm, both were also employed. Mary Carr-Greer served first as a teacher and later as principal of the Albemarle Training School, the only post-elementary school available to African-American children in Albemarle County during the Jim Crow era of segregated education at the time. For more than 20 years, Mary Carr-Greer inspired many of her students to seek a college education, including Dr. Virgil Wood, who I believe is with us here today. while also playing a key role in the community as an active member of many clubs and groups. To honor her contribution to the community, Albemarle County named a new school, Mary Carr-Greer Elementary, posthumously in her honor in 1974. Mary's husband, Conley Greer, in addition to managing the burgeoning farm, served as Albemarle County's first African-American agricultural extension agent between 1918 and 1953. In his position, Conley Greer helped many families to improve their lives through scientifically advanced farming practices disseminated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Greer built the large barn at Riverview Farm in 1937, 1938, using agency plans for improved farm buildings. Greer used the barn to demonstrate modern farming practices to his constituents. The barn stands today as a rare surviving example of a standardized plan barn built by an extension agent for this purpose. Together, Mary and Conley Greer worked with African-American families throughout Albemarle County between the 1910s and 1950s, helping to improve life in many ways during the era of segregation and helped to bring the community together as a robust and lively support system. Most of the buildings present on the property at the time have been preserved today, including the farmhouse built by Hugh Carr, a shed, a 3-bay garage, and a ham house built by the Greers between circa 1917 and 1956, in addition to the large frame barn built by Conley Greer. Together with a family cemetery, surviving farm roads, the large garden site shown on this image, plantings around the house, fence lines, fields, and outlying features like spring boxes, the ruins of a tenant house, stone walls, and other features associated with Riverview Farm. These constitute among the last remaining intact resources associated with the African-American farming and tradesperson community of Union Ridge and Hydraulic Mills today that arose during Reconstruction and flourished during the final quarter of the 19th century. Two of Mary and Conley Greer's grandchildren, Theodosia Lemons and Manfred Jones, spent time living at Riverview Farm. We are fortunate to be able to talk with them today and share their memories of the property, as well as to read several accounts that were collected by early Ivy Creek Foundation members during the late 1970s and 1980s after the property was acquired by Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville and designated Ivy Creek Natural Area. These accounts, including the direct recollections of students of Mary Carr-Greer, co-workers of Conley Greer, neighbors, family members, and friends, were used in developing the history in the National Register nomination. To be eligible for listing in the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places, properties need to demonstrate significance in American history. We explored that issue based on some of the things that I've already mentioned, such as the fact that Riverview Farm is a rare surviving example of the type of farm that was encountered in many areas earlier, but no longer survives today, and that it affords an unusual opportunity to understand an African-American farmstead and the important contributions of members of the Carr-Greer family over a 100-year period. The property was indicated as significant at both the local and state levels for contributions in the area of agriculture, architecture, education, and African-American heritage for a period extending between Hugh Carr's initial purchase of land in 1870 and Conley Greer's death in 1956. Hugh Carr, Mary Carr-Greer, and Conley Greer are each listed as significant persons for their contributions in the areas of agriculture, education, and community lifeways. We were pleased to learn that the Virginia Department of Historic Resources plans to share the nomination as a model for others to use in developing nominations for other properties. A lot of people have not been exposed to the National Register, and there are many misconceptions about the implications for listing a property in the National Register. Listing is an honorary designation that does not afford the owner any restrictions on their future use of the property or the way in which the property is managed. Sometimes when you hear about concerns that you're not allowed to make changes to, doors or windows or paint colors, that is typically for a local historic district designation, but not for the federal and state designations. So while it does not convey any restrictions, it also does not necessarily protect the property from change. One area that it does have opportunities for is to require any entity, a government entity that might be proposing to make a change for public works or road projects to go through an extra level of evaluation and consideration before those are implemented. So the Western bypass at one time was proposed to go through this property. And if it had been listed in the National Register, it would have been afforded certain benefits to preventing some of the impacts of that road from coming through. Otherwise, it's an important process because it affords a level of recognition that the property is significant in American history, and it's a recognition that is kind of a nationwide standard. And for that reason, it can be really important that you document your historic significance in order to secure certain types of grant funding. And so for us, for the Ivy Creek Foundation, this is an important consideration because fundraising and being able to pay for some of the proposed and necessary changes may require grant funding. As I mentioned earlier, this listing is also important because it will help us to waive some code requirements. So when and if we are able to open the house to the public, we will not have to destroy, the interior fabric in order to add certain, fire code or accessibility improvements that, we'll be able to find a creative way to do those things, but not just, destroy some of the historic building fabric in doing so. One of the other implications that's important to the farmhouse group is that listing in the National Register suggests that we take a particular stance and apply a particular level of care and stewardship to the way in which the building and the outbuildings are treated in the future. We recommend, or we are going to be following the federal guidance that's available on how historic properties are treated. Specifically, the Secretary of the Interior has standards for the treatment of historic properties, which we intend to follow to the extent possible as we incorporate rehabilitation and potentially opening the building to the public. So since completing the National Register nomination in spring of 2020, the Farmhouse Group has supported the need to record, document, research, and develop preservation strategies that will help support this goal of protecting surviving physical, tangible evidence of Riverview Farm, including the farmhouse, both exterior and interior, and all of the features I listed earlier. In support of this goal, the Farmhouse Group has targeted working closely with family members, conducting additional research, collecting and archiving all available farm records and memorabilia, and developing preservation strategies for all historic features. In the future, this this information is likely to be used to support design of ways in which the landscape can support storytelling. And one of the goals that the Farmhouse Group has, sort of setting a timeline for when we want to accomplish the goals, is potentially to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Hugh Carr's completion of the purchase of his first parcel of Riverview Farm, which he did in 1873, which would give us in 2023, the sesquicentennial celebration. We are excited about this possibility. We are, starting to think about what opportunities might be out there. And one of the ideas that has come up that's kind of fun is that potentially we could think about developing a documentary film or some other kind of a piece that would be that would record both the history of the property as well as this preservation process that we're undergoing. I'm now going to talk a little bit about some of the actual projects and processes that are going on right now and are anticipated to continue into 2023. I know this is a shocking photo up top, but this is kind of the way the house appeared when it was being lived in by a caretaker. As the Albemarle County decided that removal of the caretaker was possible, and the Farmhouse Group supported that and the idea of moving to some kind of public accessibility, the Farmhouse Group began working with Albemarle County to address not just the removal of the personal items here, but also the repair issues that you can see in the photograph. So the photograph below and the photograph above are maybe 5 to 10 years, taken 5 to 10 years apart, and there was quite a bit of deterioration that had occurred, and the house was at risk really of potentially being lost or having extensive problems if it wasn't immediately stabilized and repaired. In supporting this idea, the Farmhouse Group developed some documents that the county used to go to their annual funding, their request for funding, and started to include repair of the farmhouse in their annual budgeting process. So the first funds that were made available were targeted to address the most pressing repair need, replacement of the roof, and also addressing what we call mothballing, or making sure that there are no openings in the exterior envelope that will allow water and animals to get into the house and to just destroy the interior. And so this process was carefully funded, and sufficient money was available. But the Farmhouse Group and Ivy Creek Foundation was invited to participate in the actual overall process of the replacement to make sure that the work was done in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior Standards and good preservation practice. And helping us in this process was Jody Lahendro, who's a historical landscape architect with the University of Virginia, who donated his time to help oversee the process and to help collect information about the house. We actually learned quite a bit in terms of our research needs about the construction of the house. So once the roof was removed, all of a sudden it revealed, some of the original construction methods and materials. And so Jody was able to record that information and analyze it and help us piece together the timeline of the house. He is here today to tell the fascinating story of last spring's Odyssey, which occurred during the early days of the COVID shutdown. So for that reason, it's quite memorable. So Jody, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will advance your slides as you direct.
Thank you, Liz. I have to make one correction though to you. I am not a landscape architect. I am an architect. You called me a
historical architect.
Yeah. Yes, I am I'm the historic preservation architect for the University of Virginia, and my involvement with the project is nowhere near as in depth as Liz and Steve Thompson's. And I have no real official connection with Ivy Creek or the Farmhouse Study Group. I'm just an ad hoc preservationist who was asked to be available to provide some advice when needed. And so I go ahead and advance it, Liz. So what happened before I became involved was that the Farmhouse Study Group had commissioned a couple of assessment studies that focused solely on the condition of the farmhouse, documenting the kinds of problems that were seen and studying the recommendations for correcting them. That happened in 2018. Next. And that was done by WJE Wisjani Eisner engineers. And then from that condition assessment, a scope of work for the stabilization project was developed. And it really focused on two main things, the roof replacement and then the stabilization of severely damaged structural and envelope issues. My involvement and this effort is really focused on the exterior of the building, because really the goal is simply to protect the building and give it and allow us time then to do a more in-depth study of the history of the building and other condition issues. Next. And so an architectural engineering firm was hired by the county, Crabtree, Robaugh and Associates, and they developed the stabilization project documents for re-roofing and for stabilization repairs. And you see some of the pictures here. Next. A schedule was developed, costs were obtained by the county, and work began early last year in March, the end of March, and proceeded in a logical fashion to the substantial completion, which was in May. Next. And so my involvement really during this stabilization project was to document what was uncovered as roofing was replaced, and also to provide advice on preservation issues. But a lot of what I was mostly concerned with is, as the roof was taken off, to get as many photographs as possible of the conditions, so that when eventually a historic structure report is done, this information will be available to the professionals that study the issues of the evolution of the building's construction history. So that's this was, one day's pictures or one visit's pictures. Next. And so some of the things that were discovered during this process was such things as in the lower left, once the roofing came off, discovered that the cornice was actually 20th century, late 20th century change to the building, replacement done by the county, I believe. And and then also on your bottom right, you'll see where there is evidence of a hatch for access to the attic in the main original block of the house that had been covered up later on, but you could still see it in the attic. And then the top right gives you, these are some of the documentation photos I took to show that indeed there was at the cornice next to the fireplace in the main block some salvaged reused wood that had been painted already, and that's what you see on the top side of that piece of soffit used. Next. And this is a good example. The wing is thought to be, well, it certainly was put on after Conley Greer and Mary Greer purchased the house or inherited the house. And, but it's not known exactly when it was put on. So this is where, if you look at the valley between the wing to the right and the main original block of the house to the left. Next. This is that valley again on the left-hand side, and you start to see on the extreme left where the soffit, we're looking at the top of the soffit at the cornice. Clearly all that was done in the late 20th century. Then within that, that new roof of the addition, this is the top right. It's the original.
I think it's interesting. Yeah.
Wood shingles that sheathed the, or was the roof covering for the original block or original house. And then by putting the roof on for the wing, it protected this piece of the roof, and we now have it as evidence. And then I'm looking and documenting such things as the bottom right-hand side. These are wire nails connecting the addition's roof rafters to the original block. These are nails are typically 20th century. And yet on the left hand, just to the left of this, you'll see losing my terms all of a sudden, a 19th century nail, cut nail, thank you. A cut nail that has been just banged down to get it out of the way. So these are the kinds of details that a professional will be glad to have when they start looking at evidence for the different changes over time. Next. This is the back wing again, and the porch to the left is the low sloped block. And that porch used to be open, and it was then infilled by the Greers. And so if you get on that low porch and then look back at the main block of the house, that's the picture on the top right. And then looking closer at the cornice that is exposed on the main block of the house that's outside, that's the bottom right. But when you follow that same cornice inside, the roof of the wing, the original cornice is on the left-hand side, and it's a very different profile. Again, this was on the left, not seen or not known until the roofing came off and we had access to these elements. Very important information. We know that clearly the cornice to the right, we have seen already examples where the cornice materials, the crown molding, the soffits were all late 20th century. So they are not original to the house. Next. Some of the other interesting things we found just in the stabilization project, this is the front porch of the historic block of the house. And the left-hand side shows after the metal roof had come off. And then typically what would happen is that I'd find out when roofing was going to come off of different sections of the house from the contractor. I should have mentioned that the contractor is Woodland Construction for the stabilization project. And they would have let me know when it was going to be off. I would hop in my car, come out and start crawling around on the roof to take these photographs before they then would put sheathing over top of the purlins, the roofing boards, or in some cases like this porch, we had to replace the roofing boards and then put the current roof on. And so in the middle top picture, there's a real small red arrow pointing to a piece of flashing. And just below that is a picture of that flashing close up. That flashing is much shorter than the roof that of the current porch, which extends the entire length of the front of the house. Going back and just looking at some historic photographs, you start to see on the right-hand side shadow lines from that smaller original porch. Well, we know it's earlier than this porch. Don't know if it's original yet, but it certainly predates the porch that's on it. Again, this is some of the evidence that would have been lost if we didn't document it during the removal of the roofing. Next. And then some of the stabilization repairs we had to make. The chimney to the right is was in the wing of the building, and we could see that once the flashing was taken off, it was in terrible condition, jeopardizing the safety of the building. So a decision was made with my consultation to remove the chimney down below the roof level. We have saved all the brick from the chimney so that it can be replaced in the future. Other things we found in the garage addition to the left, the very severely water damaged beam holding up a piece of the hyphens roof. I helped design a stabilization effort where we stabilized and protected and structurally held that roof with the underneath the rafters, but did it in such a way that we didn't replace the historic material. So that material is still there to be read and examined by future professionals during the historic structure report research. Next. And this another stabilization effort that we had to make. The reason we had to take the roofing boards off that long porch in the front was because it was separating from the main house. So this is the bottom right is a photo of a structural method of tying that porch back to the house. Helped devise a way that it could be done without destroying any of the historic fabric of at the main house. And then on the left-hand side, the columns are in terrible condition, and yet we wanted to keep them so that we could study them during the historic structure report. So we came up with a method of temporarily shoring that roof with 4x4s on either side of the columns so that we could keep the columns in place and then be able to study them and come up with an appropriate preservation restoration method in the future. You have to know that the stabilization project had to happen quickly. It happened with incomplete information, incomplete knowledge of the building, but it needed to be done to help protect the building. and give us enough time to do a proper level of research. Next. And this is what's called the ham house. Liz is going to have to tell you why it's called the ham house. I don't know, but it's an addition to the main house that's connected by roofs that are hyphens, and the wall, the end wall, as you can see, severely damaged. It's moving, and the picture inside just below that, the reason why is because the water had deteriorated the bottom of the studs for that wall. I think it's believed that this building might have been moved from another location to this location next to the house and then connected by a roof. So it's an important building to study. We need to keep it around and study the original materials. So once again, I came up with a method that Woodland Construction implemented of a shoring wall, a stabilization temporary wall inside of the historic wall that took the load of the roof and moved it to this shoring wall and took that load off of the exterior wall. And then we protected the outside with polyethylene, so that now this wall is preserved, and it gives time to, again, for professionals to study the joinery, study the nails, study the way the wood has been fabricated, all the kinds of evidence needed to be able to date a construction element. Next. We did the same thing with certain areas of the main house that was showing distress. On the outside, this is the corner of the main original block of the house. Cut away the stucco. We know that the stucco is a later addition over the original clapboards, and that's what you're seeing in the bottom right-hand side are those original painted clapboards, and a little bit of the corner board still left beneath the stucco. And all we wanted to do here was remove the stucco, be able to examine the structure, and here there is enough structure inside underneath of the clapboard and the corner board to confirm to us that it didn't need to be taken out now and replaced. We could just preserve it in place. We covered it with polyethylene, and it's still there for others to research. Next. The one thing that couldn't be saved were the chimneys, just from the top of the stucco up. And as you can see on the left-hand side, much of the chimney stack had already been replaced at the very top, the top 8 or so courses. So this is where having a preservationist involved was important to the project. I worked with the contractor whose mason had never used lime mortar to use lime mortar and not the harder Portland cement. So we dismantled the chimney, saving the brick, cleaning the brick, and then relayed the brick using lime mortar, which is a material that it has about the same strength as the brick. So we're not going to be damaging the brick in the future. And of course, when the chimney stack was down, took lots of pictures showing the clapboarding behind it and the stucco and the cornice. And so I worked with the mason. And then next, one of the things we discovered, looking back at historic photographs on the right-hand side and looking closely at the chimney cap, or the top of the chimney, there was a corbelled brick giving a little bit of decorative effect to the chimney that was not there when we started our work. It had been removed when they replaced those top 8 courses. So by going back, looking at the historic photos, we were able to reconstruct that bit of corbelling and restore the visual effect of the chimney. Next. So all of that hopefully is preparing you for the fact that a historic structure report needs to be done. This is a document that accumulates the information, as much information as we can get, as we have and as we can find out about the house, both its through archives, through physical evidence, close examination of the materials in the building by a trained preservation architect or architectural historian that understands the different periods of construction and the different construction methods. It also, next, I think that will be more helpful. Next. Yeah, here. So, you know, I see the different parts of the historic structure report that's needed as being the documentation and the description, photography, measured drawings. We don't even have good measured drawings of the building. And then the history of construction. This is archival research. You all have the archival research. Liz and Steve Thompson have done an extraordinary job gathering materials, and we owe them an incredible debt of thanks for all that they've done. The nomination report is one of the most thorough I have ever read, but now that needs to be corroborated with a detailed physical examination of the materials themselves, studying the different changes and details. We have lots of questions about the building's history of construction. There's been a lot of changes made to it, and it'd be nice, it's essential to be able to document that. And then those physical and the archival information together, you can then evaluate the significance of all those different changes over time, and which then lays out the map for what things have to be preserved during any kind of reuse of the building. Because in an adaptive reuse, you're going to need to be making some changes to allow that adaptive reuse in the systems, in technology, in building code issues. So you want to go into that knowing what you have to preserve, what's is significant and must be preserved. A good condition survey needs to be done. The survey done by WJE at the very beginning needs to be done more completely. There is very little access, there is limited access to the crawl space. And until you can get into the crawl space and look at the wood structure that is hidden from view, we're not going to get a good understanding of damage that has been done by termites or by water infiltration. And then lastly, understanding the county and the Ivy Creek desire for reuse of the building, programming those requirements, and then doing a building code analysis are essential for then making recommendations for how a design can be appropriately made while preserving the historic materials and condition of the building. And I think I'm finished, Liz. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jody. That's so helpful. And it just shows how important technical expertise is to this process, but also how important our research work is, and even to the point of how important historic photographs can be, such as in the case of the chimney, where that photo that showed the corbelling, you know, really directed how that chimney was rebuilt. And so we, on the farmhouse group, are so indebted to Jody for his involvement in the process to date and for his advocacy for this historic structure report. His recommendation that this is the next step, and I just wanted to broaden that conversation, that it's not just the farmhouse that needs this in-depth look-see, but it's also all of the outbuildings, because those are part of this suite of features that tell us about the farm during, you know, the Carr-Greer family period. And we don't want to lose a single one of those. And so the historic structure report would also apply to those, and we would do this, undertake the same process as Jody's recommending for the house for each of those buildings. So we have identified trying to get the historic structure report done as priority 1 for the farmhouse group. It will take funding, and so that has been one of the issues. The county, because of COVID, has not been able to continue to add the project into its annual budgets. There just is not enough money available. And so the farmhouse group and the Ivy Creek Foundation are looking for ways to seek grant funding and other opportunities to make this historic structure report happen. In addition to the priority of the historic structure report, we are exploring all other avenues of research where we can collect data, not just about the structures, but about the landscape. And so, you know, you saw that photograph of Mary Greer and her granddaughter in the front yard with the boxwoods in front of the porch. We have other photographs that help describe the landscape around the house. And so it's been really important to try to collect as much information as possible so that we can bring that landscape back to life. I will say that over time, invasive species and volunteer plants have come in and kind of obscured our understanding of the landscape. And so we recognize that as an issue. We also understand that there were other buildings and other features in the landscape, roads, driveways, entrance gates, fences, that are no longer present today, but that we can look for either through historic records, through family memories, or through archaeology to try to locate those things to get a fuller understanding of the property. And so the farmhouse group in this 3-year initiative that I've described, you know, culminating in 2023, is pursuing quite a few research avenues right now. We are specifically working through the foundation to make further contact with the family, to document the history of the property, to ask more additional questions than those we've already asked, and to work with them to plan for how the property might be used and interpreted in the future. We're also working with various groups in the community to partner on projects and to getting the word out, you know, for any memorabilia or information that people might have. And interestingly, along those lines, Diana Foster, one of the farmhouse group important members, received information just yesterday or recently that one of the caretaker family members from, you know, way back has stories about what the landscape looked like, you know, 40 years ago, which is a great help to us to take a step back in time and to understand things that might be missing. And so we are going to reach out to them and maybe do an oral history or an interview to learn more. Similarly, we did that kind of thing with one of the Albemarle County Parks and Recreation personnel, Matt Smith, who retired last year. And before he left, we walked around the property and asked him to explain some of the projects that he remembered the county had done. So that would have revealed things like the cornice board that Jody talked about that had been replaced, and some of the previous roof replacement projects that might confuse some of the reading that we have of the evidence that Jody was talking about. We are also going through Albemarle County records that they provided to us to look at to try to understand some of those changes that occurred in the more recent past. We also have quite a few people who are working on conducting research into sort of odd tangential history issues that might reveal information about the property, such as the establishment of the Rivanna Reservoir, which occurred in the 60s, and for which there are, construction drawings, which we recently were able to scan, and then Eric was able to lay those down and connect them to all of the GIS work that he's been doing. And so those reveal, some additional information about features that might be important to understand. Also, Earlysville Road was realigned, and that abutted the property, and there may be information about that road realignment that will help us, as well as like the addition of utility corridors through the property. We also have benefited from Tom Dieroff, a forester who has done a forest stand evaluation, and through his analysis of historic aerial photographs and his empirical investigations of tree stands on the property, we can start to understand where fields were at what time, and where wood lots might have been, and where home sites might have been. And so we have an incredible amount of information about the farm just from those efforts and investigations. I think one of the fascinating aspects of the history of the property is Carr-Greer's activities as the agricultural extension agent. And because of his job, he was required to submit a report each year about his activities. And all of those reports are held at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. And so we have gone and copied his reports for, I think, between the early 1920s and 1943 to date, and we will continue to collect the rest of them. And they reveal the types of programs that he was recommending to his constituents, and the types of activities he may have been undergoing on his property himself. And Tom Dieroff's forest stand delineation, he mentions some of the evidence of field terracing and soil erosion control measures that may have been part of Carr-Greer's application of scientific farming principles to his own land that he might have been sharing with his constituents. So we have a lot of interesting avenues for research there. And I will say that it is Carr-Greer's work as agricultural extension agent that elevated the property to not just a locally significant property, but to a statewide significant property. And I believe that the Virginia Department of Historic Resources feels that if we can tell this story, that it will be somewhat innovative, and that not a lot of places have the opportunity to tell this story. And so we are actively pursuing additional research along those lines. In terms of the landscape, Diana Foster has led a group of volunteers to start to clear away many of the invasives and the volunteer species to try to reveal the bones of the garden that Mary Carr-Greer developed. She was an incredible gardener. She was a member of a garden club. She showed her flowers and plants at garden club events. She's quite an important figure locally, and we are trying to identify both through looking at historic photographs, through documenting through GPS records, and by looking at evidence on the ground, her original garden. We have been benefited in the past from several local garden committees in supporting the work of Ivy Creek Foundation, and I believe this will be of interest to them as we move forward. We still see evidence of Mary Carr-Greer's hand every spring when the bulbs emerge, and when some of the sort of old-fashioned flowering shrubs like bridal wreath, spirea reappear and make a show and remind us of her, of Mary Carr-Greer. One of the benefits from the clearing of the invasives and the volunteers has been revealing some of the historic features. So the you know, tangle on the top left has you know, yielded to the view of the stone wall that supported the original driveway into the property, which is also edged by boxwoods that most likely were planted by Mary Carr-Greer. We've also found, such in the photograph on the bottom, a pair of whitewashed stones that mark the entry into the driveway, which is a small feature, but one that, you know, is just really nice. It makes you, you know, it has a scale and a personal touch that's of interest. And so we're recording the locations of these features to protect them for the future. We also have 2 Masters of Landscape Architecture students at the University of Virginia School of Architecture who are doing an independent study under Nancy Takahashi to document beyond the broadness of the GIS maps that I showed you earlier of Eric's. They are trying to draw everything in a program called AutoCAD and to record all of the features on site. And these are going to serve as measured drawings that can be useful in the future should you know, design for new walkways or other features be proposed, so that we can actually look at grading issues and the cost of construction or the alignment of paths and that kind of thing. So those are in process right now. We are also in the process of developing preservation protocols, which work with the Secretary of the Interior Standards for what to do when landscape features are at risk, like the house was at risk. So the stone wall right now has been undermined in places by tree of heaven and other volunteer species. And so the way in which you repair this wall, the way in which you make sure that there's appropriate drainage so that it will continue to function well in the future, should be done according to certain principles. And so we're working now on how to develop those, as well as how to remove the trees carefully and appropriately. And the process of documenting all features that are removed as a record for the future, for future researchers. Other things that we're working on are addressing potential additional avenues of recognition. So the Albemarle County is currently erecting a series of local historical markers, which are different from your state historical markers. And they recently placed one at the Albemarle Training School where Mary Carr-Greer was the principal, which is around the corner. But the County Historic Resources Committee has suggested that they would like to provide one of these markers for Riverview Farm. And so we are going to be working on the text to include on that and where it should be located so that people can enjoy reading it, and that we can make sure to highlight the importance of the property. We are also hoping to continue to pursue ways to implement design ideas that were included in a landscape plan proposed by Warren Bird and Sue Nelson, based on continued collection of knowledge and the ideas for educational programming to be developed by Catherine Boston, the education director, as well as family members and other members of our Ivy Creek community in the future. We have this wonderful blueprint, which suggested some of the ways that the farm history might be interpreted, even as some of the other programmatic needs involving expanded parking, which if you've been there lately, you realize how important that is, how we might establish a safe bus drop off for all of the school children, and how we might provide some more accessible path systems, because right now I don't think we meet accessibility codes. And so the plan was intended to address some of these issues, and we will be continuing to look at that in the future. And then all of this is leading towards the need or the interest in celebrating the 150th anniversary in 2023. We, as I mentioned, have talked about the idea of a documentary film and some kind of an event marking that celebration. I will note that a recent film that you all could watch, which is only about a half an hour long, is the Blue Ridge Tunnel documentary produced by Paul and Ellen Wagner, which I believe is available on YouTube and is being shown on PBS as well. Might be an example of the type of thing we're talking about, which both talks about the history of the property as well as the preservation process. And so we're excited about this opportunity, but there's a lot to come, and we are here to share these ideas and also to invite you to participate in whatever way might be of interest to you. We love our volunteers. We love getting together. We love working together on all these initiatives. And it takes a village really to do all of this. It takes the specialized expertise of someone like Jody, but it also takes the interest and brainstorming of anybody who's interested in this to come up with a way forward. And so we look forward to working with you all on this in the future. I would also say that we are not operating in a vacuum, that we are part of the Ivy Creek Foundation, and the foundation has recently undertaken a strategic planning process, which is going to be a charter for the future. And I was hoping that Sue Earhart could speak to that a little bit and how all of this fits into a broader vision for the organization going forward.
Thank you, Liz and Jody. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Yes, so the Ivy Creek Foundation, we have recently passed a new strategic plan, and one of our key initiatives is formalizing and creating a descendant advisory group to help us with these plans moving forward. And so there'll be a communication going out to them soon about what that will look like and how to move forward. And so we're really excited to get that more formalized. We're also through the strategic plan, working on all the lands, and there's several board members on this call. Thank you all for all you're going to do with the strategic plan. So it's really exciting. As Liz said, the farmhouse study group has done a tremendous amount of work for many, many years to preserve this site. And, it does take a village, and it will also take resources to make that happen. And so if you're not currently a member of the Ivy Creek Foundation, I encourage you to do so, so you can help these wonderful efforts. And with that, Liz, do you have anything else? Otherwise, can we open it up to questions?
No, we're just happy to answer questions for.
Yes. So Jody, if you want to unmute yourself. So now Catherine is going to MC our question and answer section.
We have a request to stop sharing the screen so that you guys can see everyone in the audience. That's beautiful. So thank you, everyone. We have a few questions in the chat box. I also think this is a small enough group that feel free to ask your questions if you have them. The first question we have, Jody, was to ask you whether or not there was actually any termite damage. Did you see any? Oh, you're muted, I think.
If the building is in Virginia and it's older than 50 years, it has termite damage, period. So yes, there's termite damage there. I found it in the rafters. They will go a long way to find wood that is moist, and it's in the plates and the wall that we had to support with a separate wall in the ham house that was riddled with termites. So yes, there's termite damage in the house that will need to be addressed during the full work.
Thank you. This is not a question, but there was a mention of Lorenzo Dickerson, who will be familiar to many people in this presentation, of Moffintown Media, has been documenting the history of African American schools in Albemarle County, and the writer wonders whether or not he might be interested in this project, which would be lovely. And I think Lorna Wernz is the chair of our board president, and she wanted to thank.
Yes, thank you, Catherine, and thank you. As president of Ivy Creek Foundation, I just want to thank all of you volunteers who have through time, through many years, through decades, made it possible that a recognition of the history of this property is important. And Liz Sargent and Jody, I know being on site, you guys are just amazing and have been so working so hard and giving us so much of your time. I want to thank you sincerely from the board and from the foundation for your amazing contributions. Also to many other of you volunteers who, like Diana Foster, who are also doing remarkable work to move ahead with our knowledge and our investigations of this amazing property. But also, I wanted to let everybody know that, or it's just sort of a reminder, the property, the land, and the buildings are owned jointly by the county and the city. So fundraising efforts, as we look forward to fundraising efforts for specific initiatives, such as the next steps with the farmhouse, we need to remember that anything that we do in terms of fundraising efforts need to be coordinated with the county and the city, right, Catherine? Right, Sue? So we're really excited about new initiatives for fundraising, but we just need to remember that we have partners. And so I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Jody and Liz and Dee Dee, Edwina, there's so many people who have been here and who have given us so much to build where we are today. And just want to thank you for that.
I have a question for Liz. You showed those great maps of the farm 50, 100 years ago, before Earlysville Road was moved. Is there any way to get an overlay so that you can see what it was and then you can overlay what it is now? I live in the area and I believe my property was owned by Carr-Greer, but I haven't been able to find any way to overlay what it looks like now over historic documents. Yeah. Is that something I would find in the county? Because I haven't seen any of your maps online.
Yeah, Eric is on the call right now, and he has done all of that sort of overlay using historic aerials plus, you know, the current information. Eric, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but he has done an incredible job. Steve Thompson has also contributed to that in terms of being able to compare the historic and the contemporary. So Eric, do you want to talk to that?
Hi, yeah, thank you. So we have done that mapping and those overlays, and they should be available off of the foundation's website. If you go to the link, there's a link for the cultural history, and there will be a link for story maps on the right side of the screen, as I recall. So if you look for the story mapping link on the Ivy Creek website, there's a variety of different maps, and you can see all the property holdings over time, along with the old aerial photos.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, those maps are a really wonderful tool. So I recommend them for people. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Teresa Leslie, who is one of our descendants from the Carr-Greer family, who has just commented that she's excited about our descendant advisory group. I don't know, Dr.
But I have to correct you, because I'm not descended from Carr-Greer.
Oh.
I am the descendant of Virginia Carr, who was the second youngest daughter of Hugh Carr and Texie Mae Hawkins. So and that's kind of fascinating work you're doing. And I actually had a chance to visit the farm, and once again, thank you everybody for treating us like celebrities. I mean, we were down there. And we got to go into the house, which was an amazing experience to actually walk through the house. And I keep calling it the hog house, but it is the ham house. And the barn is just spectacular. It was my third time visiting, but this trip really brought it home. And I just want to say that remember that the family goes so far beyond the property. And that's why it's so important to involve family in this. I saw a picture of cousin Charles, of Marshall Carr, and that's just a starting place for the family. But the family's history goes on beyond that. Amazing people, amazingly educated. And, I'm very, as I always say, I'm very interested to help out in any way I can, even though, unfortunately, I'm not in Charlottesville. So.
We'll be talking soon, Dr. Leslie.
Dee has all my contact information.
And I just like to say, what a great presentation. And as somebody who's been immersed in this for decades now, what really struck me was how you use those photographs to kind of flesh out some of the details, especially the one of Marshall Carr on the porch with the shadow. That was amazing. So just incredible work, and cannot thank particularly, and there's several of you, but Liz and Jody, particularly today, and of course, Steve and Eric and everybody else who's contributing for your contribution of your expertise. I mean, how do you measure that? So thank you.
Well, thanks to you, Dee, because you collected so many important records in the time frame when you were the executive director that I don't know where you found all that information, but it was essential to a lot of our understanding, and continues to be and will be in the future as well. And we're just building off of these incredible foundations that were provided by Babs and by you and by others in the past. And we're just putting our fingers out to look for more and more. We always want more. Yes, and Jane Smith, Karen mentions, is also an incredible researcher who's contributed so much to this understanding as well. And there are a lot of people, I'm sorry if I've overlooked anyone today.
Jody, also there was a question about the stucco and wondering whether you're any closer to knowing when the stucco went up.
No, only because it hasn't been a focus of the work during the stabilization phase. But I think it can be when it becomes a focus during the historic structure report research, that can be identified and determined.
And I do think that
can be put into its sequence of how it relates to the other changes that went on in the house.
I do think we've been able to ask that question of Theodosia Lemons, who lived in the house potentially around that time. And so that might help us at least narrow the time frame as well. That's really great. Been great.
Jody, a question I've gotten from visitors is maybe people don't know that stucco would not have been the original covering to the house. So if you could explain what maybe the original covering to the original house would be.
It was clapboard, wood clapboarding, and we have evidence of it. The photographs I showed inside the front porch attic of that front porch showed the clapboarding, and interestingly, it wasn't painted. I see no paint on it for the part that's outside of the flashing, outside of the smaller porch that predated the existing one, and that's not really unusual. Often a house went, after it was constructed, it went for a while before being painted. It went for, I've known of houses that was 10, 20 years before the plaster was put inside. So that's not unusual, but it's interesting.
And that same picture of Marshall Carr that you used the shadow from has the clapboard in that, in the backdrop. He's in front of the house and it's got clapboard.
Yeah, I think there are plenty other photos too that show the clapboarding beforehand. And as I recall, there's clapboarding underneath the stucco that's painted in the wing too. So clearly the stucco was not contemporary with the construction of the rear wing. It came after that.
So we also have, and Dr. Leslie, I appreciate your correcting me. I'm sorry to have gotten that wrong. But there are some people who were not here early on when the other descendants who are here were introduced. I don't know if we want to make further introductions, or if people have any additions they would like to add. And then we do have another question from Steve Thompson about the lightning rods, whether or not we still have the lightning rods.
Yes, they're in storage. Go ahead, Jody.
Yeah, we, and I meant to put in a photo of that. We were very careful to preserve and save lots of the material that we had to take off for the re-roofing and for the stabilization. So the lightning rods they are there. We have samples of the roofing boards from all the different sections of the roof. We have a piece of the cornice, the historic cornice. We have nails, we have bricks. We have samples of all this that Liz and Steve Thompson were very careful in labeling and storing in one of the sheds. So they're protected and they're available for, again, future research.
Although they may be at your house now, Lorna, huh?
Yeah, if I can just jump in for a second. I want to reassure you, sir, Mr. Thompson, we have been very particular about Liz's and Jody's recommendations, along with Sue Earhart's admonitions. We have been very careful to maintain the lightning rods, as well as every single brick, every single piece of anything that might have been original to the farmhouse that we could find on site. And per Sue's recommendations, we have protected them. And right now, the lightning rods and the lightning, the whole protection system is in the 3-bay garage, and they will be protected in, they'll be protected as far as time. They'll be protected. Yeah.
But they also could be something that we show to the public when we open things up, right? We can show some of the earlier building materials potentially to the public, which might be of interest.
Right.
To us preservation nerds, you know.
Yeah, Liz, if I could just say that, you know, we've had the complete cooperation of Parks and Rec in the protection of all these artifacts. So, yeah. But, you know, it's all because Liz, Jody, and Sue with Catherine have made sure that, you know, we have protected all these elements.
And you, Lorna, you put your heart and soul into this.
That's
so
right.
We have another question about the building, trying to understand when Jody spoke about the wing upper story being filled in. Did you infer that this had been an open sleeping porch that was then closed in? And is this the section with the aluminum window frames?
Yes. So it was a 2-story porch with a stair, with an outside stair, well, a stair within the 2-story porch. The porch was open. I probably a stretch to call it a sleeping porch. This would predate the period when sleeping porches, I think, well, I take that back. No, it's not. But I don't think it's wide enough to be much of a sleeping porch. But that's something to be determined through more research. Certainly the aluminum windows, also the panels enclosing that porch, we discovered are plywood. So that's a very recent infill. And one of the things that would be discussed and identified in a historic structure report is that infill to make it enclosed a significant preservation, a significant part of the building, historic building, and should it be preserved, or is there the opportunity of making it an open 2-story porch again? It all depends upon the evidence of when it's discovered it was infilled and how important that was to the house. But it's one of one of many, many questions that are out there and can't be answered until there's more research of the building.
Okay, so Sue is reminding everyone that there is a short survey we would love for you to fill out before you go. And I don't know whether anyone else has any questions that we haven't addressed yet. Lorna.
Hi, I just looked more thoroughly at Steve's question about the lightning protection system on the farmhouse. And he asked, are they in storage or did they go back onto the roof? So Steve, your answer is the old lightning protection system is in storage currently to this day, I believe today, is in the 3-bay garage. However, we need to address in our near future plans for the farmhouse the appropriate a new appropriate lightning protection system. We did, Liz, Jody, and I did, I believe, discuss this with the county group that were taking care of the this last phase, the phase one securing of the farmhouse, but there is not currently a lightning protection system on the farmhouse, and it does have a metal roof. So I would like to emphasize again what Liz and Jody, Catherine, and Sue have been saying, and Liz, of course, about our next steps. We need to have an active, appropriate lightning protection system on that on the farmhouse, and it's not there now. The old one is preserved, but there is not a new current one that is active. Just want to make that clear.
Can I just mention one more thing? Thank you, Lorna. One of the other ways we might be raising awareness about the property is to submit an entry into the annual Historic American Landscape Survey Challenge competition, where people all over the country are invited to submit a documentation project on a specific theme, a historic landscape with a specific theme. And so this year's theme will be African American landscapes. And Edwina St. Rose and I are actually going to be providing an article that will be published nationally about the Daughters of Zion Historic American Landscape Survey entry that was developed a couple years ago, I think, Edwina, and that will be published. And so then that will sort of introduce this year's challenge. So I think there's going to be a lot of sort of excitement building, and in I think the end of July, we would submit this. And so hopefully, you know, that's okay with the foundation and everybody, but I think it would be really nice to have that out there. And then we'll be published sort of nationally with that information. And it will go to the Library of Congress as well, the documentation. So. Yeah.
I think those are all of our questions. I don't know, Sue, if you had a...
Then I would just like to again thank Liz and Jody for a fantastic presentation today, virtual. Thank you so much. And thank you to all. There's so many people on the Zoom today and so many others that have contributed so much time and effort into all of this work. And thank you, Dr. Leslie, for joining us today. We're so excited to see you again. We wanted to also give a special shout out. She couldn't join us today, but Chris Myers is an incredible person who has really been the unsung hero for Ivy Talks for many, many years. And unfortunately, she's moving away. And so she's passing the mantle. But we want to thank Chris, wherever you are, for all the work you've done on Ivy Talks through the years. Thank you, Catherine, for being my co-host today. And then Rochelle Garwood, who's also was on the call. She's our trifecta staff here, and she's going to help us get it posted onto YouTube in the next couple of days. On behalf of the staff and foundation, thank you all for joining us this afternoon on this beautiful spring day. Thank you to all our members and donors for everything you do to support all the wonderful work that's going on. And, you know, this will be our last Ivy Talk for the spring, but they will be coming back. And so stay tuned. If you aren't part of our newsletter listserv, please sign up. That's how you'll find out about what's going on. And there's many other resources that you can learn about Ivy Talk. So thank you all, and happy spring, and be well.
Thank you. Okay, bye.